Hello and welcome to this session about turning your web maps into engaging applications. I'm Dave Tong, I'm in the pre-sales team at Esri UK, and our role is to help customers understand how to make the most of our technology. I mostly work with public safety customers, so you'll notice that some aspects of that have snuck into this presentation. The aim of this session is to provide an overview of the core applications, explain why you'd use each, and give you some confidence to get started. ArcGIS includes a variety of applications, so before we start, I'd like to discuss why we have so many options. At a high level, ArcGIS allows you to gather your data, visualize it to gain insight, and then share it with your community. This sharing aspect is vitally important to make GIS a success. Every team in the business will have subtly different requirements, and it's impossible to make one application that meets all those needs. Therefore, we need to create an application for each team that's focused on their workflows. As an example, let's consider a police force that is looking to share their crime data. If they want to push that out to the public, they need an application that's simple and easy to use and probably restricts access to the detailed underlying data. A patrol officer needs something very similar, but they do need access to that underlying info, because they want to be able to understand their neighbourhood and support their community. A senior officer wants something a little bit different. They want to be able to see a live view of all crimes that are happening, but they also want key statistics so they can understand, okay, where should their priorities be? And finally, an analyst, they need to be able to do some detailed analytical work and then share it with their colleagues in an engaging and insightful way. So each of these scenarios would have a slightly different set of requirements and require a slightly different solution. So we're going to be talking through these four applications today, and for the scenario to help you understand why I'd use each, we're going to be using a flooding scenario. So let's look at the data we're going to be using. So for our flooding scenario, there's three key areas that I want to address. I want to be able to plan for the flood. I want to be able to respond to the flood in the event that it actually happens. And I also want to be able to communicate out to a much wider community about how to keep themselves safe. So I've got a web map here that we're going to use for the first couple of apps. Let's talk through some of these data sets. So the first one is we've got some flood risk areas from Natural Resources Wales. I downloaded this from their website and published it to ArcGIS Online. Then I've got a couple of living atlas layers. So these are both from ONS, but we've published them from Esri UK. And I've taken deprivation data and census disability information, and I've used a blending approach so that where those two data sets overlap is where we can see these pinky purple areas. So these areas have high disability, high deprivation, so perhaps are the communities that might require the most support in the event of a flood. I've also mocked up some vulnerable addresses. These people will definitely require support. I've got all the addresses so we can see how big the scale of the problem is. And we've also got some rest centre information, which are locations that the public could evacuate to, so they've got some safe harbour while they wait the flood out. Now, if I wanted to share this with colleagues, then I want to create an application. And to do that, I go down to the bottom left here, and we've got the Create App option. So these are the four that we're going to be discussing today. But to get started, we'll use Instant Apps. And if you're just starting on your journey to using ArcGIS applications, then Instant Apps really is a great place to start. They're quick, they're easy, and very simple to use. Now, there's a wide variety of templates we can choose from to support our application. And now, because of this overwhelming number, there are some questions you can use down on the left-hand side to help you filter down to the ones you're most interested in. But I already know that the one I want to show today is the sidebar. So if I click the preview, this is going to give us a feel for what this application is going to look like when we've finished modifying it. If we're happy that looks about okay, then we can choose that and go into the builder. So we'll call it Wales Flood Demo. We can give it some tags. We can choose a location where we want it to be saved. And then we create that application. So while we're waiting for this to load, as I said, instant apps are a great place to start. However, it doesn't mean they're just for the basic community, because there's a wide variety of capabilities in here. So even if you're a more advanced user, there's probably something here for you as well. I personally use this all the time because it is so quick, but does give me a lot of capabilities. So once the interface opens, we've got a step-by-step process for building this application. So step number one is to choose the map. Now we've already done this, so we can skip through this. Step two is to give the application a title. And then we can decide, well, do we want a header or not? Step three is to decide, well, what capabilities do we want to include in the tools here on the left? So by default, we've got a legend, we've got a details panel, and we've got a location where pop-ups can come up. Now I've not got any details in this map at the moment, so I'm going to turn that off, but I do want to provide the ability for the users to turn layers on and off. So I'm going to switch that on. And as you can see, the application on the right hand side is dynamically adjusting as we make these changes, so it makes it very easy to see what the final product is going to look like. Once I've chosen that capability, we'll go to step 4, and this is where we choose how we want to configure this search bar. So do we want to include a search at all, and do we want it to be open at the beginning? We can also choose which of the variety of different geocoders we want to use as the primary address search. Now by default, we'll be using the ArcGIS World Geocoder, but if you've got some deployed to your enterprise or ArcGIS Online environment, then you can use those instead. In the final step, we need to choose the color schemes we want to use. So initially, do we want to use light or dark? And then we can choose a preset theme, or we can configure one of our own. And then the final element is to choose, well, where do we want some of our controls positioned? So at the moment, we can see that we've got the search top right, we've got the home button and zoom controls on the left. Personally, I like to keep everything together. So from a usability perspective, it just makes it very simple and easy to understand. So I'm going to move my search over, and we can see it's now dropped here. We've now finished this application and we're ready to publish it. So that hardly took any time at all. But before I do that, I just want to show you one final control. Up on the left here, we can see that we've got a slider bar to turn off Express mode. Now, Express mode is a great way to start, but if you want a bit more fine-grained control, then you can turn it off, and then we've got all the individual elements that we can run through to configure to our heart's content. So let's quickly publish that so you can see the final application. Okay, so there we go. So instant apps really are exactly what they say on the tin. In under 5 minutes, we've created an application that's usable and provides some great capabilities. So we've got the legend here, we've got a layer list so I can turn elements on and off, and we've got a pop-up, so if we interact with any of these items, then that will appear on the left-hand side here. Now, instant apps are great, but you are slightly constrained by the templates that are available. What are your options if you want total control over the look and feel of your application? Now that is where Experience Builder comes in. So Experience Builder again is a builder that allows you to create your own applications, but it does provide a lot of very detailed control. So you can make this look and feel exactly the way you want. So we've got a variety of different tools and widgets we can add to our application down on the left hand side. And it's not just tools, there are elements to ensure that we're structuring the site in a coherent way. So we've got page elements here, we've got layout options so that we can design a site that looks and feels the way we want. But to give you a feel for the customization options, let's show you how to add in a control. So what if I want to add a map layer control here? I can drag that onto the display and I can choose to position that anywhere I want. The first step is to choose, okay, well, what map is this control interacting with? So I'm going to choose the map we've currently got on display, and we can see now that we've got this layer control. I can then choose the capabilities that I want to include. So do I want to allow layers to be turned on and off? Do I want to adjust the transparency? Do I want to show the legend? So there's a lot of control with the capabilities you provide, but we can also change the style. So we can change the size of this element, we can change the colors, and I can dock this or have it free floating. So perhaps I want to snap it to the left hand side, perhaps I want to snap it to the bottom, and perhaps I want to shrink it down to a more appropriate size. So there's a lot of control here as to the way you position things in the interface, the way you design and color everything. The other thing I really like about Experience Builder is it does allow me to configure this application for different screen sizes. So if I wanted to create an application that's designed for a tablet or a mobile phone, I can take those ideas that I built into the main view and subtly configure them for those different screen sizes. So particularly when you're thinking about a mobile device, you haven't got much screen to play with, so you want a very lightweight interface that provides the tools you need. So hopefully that's given you a feel for Experience Builder. Now we'd probably need a whole session just to cover this, but I just wanted to give you a flavour of some of the possibilities. And to finish that off, let's look at this application in action. So this is the application that I was just showing in the builder. It's very lightweight, easy to understand. We've got our data in the background. I've got a legend. I've got some map layers. I've got a filter here so I can turn the various different flood zones on and off. I've also got a base map switcher. Now let's look at another version of this application using the same tools, but I've configured it very differently. So hopefully this gives you an appreciation of the fact that we can very much tailor this to our own requirements, because this application looks very different, but it includes the same controls. So hopefully that's given you a feel for Experience Builder. What I'd like to do now is touch on dashboards. Now for the dashboard scenario, I want to look at something that's a little bit more real-time, a little bit live, because that's one of the real great benefits of dashboards. They allow you to understand exactly what's happening at all times, so it's almost like a live view. And for that, I'm using the same data, but I've configured it slightly differently. So I've adjusted the symbology, particularly around the addresses. So the addresses are now color-coded based on the evacuation status. So I'm going to have officers patrolling the streets, going door to door to ensure the residents have evacuated. So I've changed the color scheme to reflect those places we visited and those places that have been evacuated successfully. I've also included a red color for those addresses where the residents aren't currently leaving, so we'd need to revisit those at a later date. I've also adjusted the symbology for the rest centres because I want to understand their current capacity. So do they have bandwidth to take more people, or should we prioritise other locations? As before, I'm going to go down to my Create App option at the bottom here, and I'm going to choose to create a dashboard. So again, we'll give it a name, we can choose tags, we can choose a location where we want to save it. It's now going to open up the dashboard environment. Now, unlike instant apps, this doesn't give us a template to start. We are going to just start with the map, and then we need to choose all the individual elements that we want to include on the display. So to do that, I go up to my plus button here, and I say I want to add an element. Then I choose where I want to add it, so I'm going to add it to the left. And what I want to do first is I want a count of the number of addresses, and specifically I want the number of addresses that are still occupied. So I'm going to add an indicator, and I'm going to choose to create that indicator against my flood addresses. So we can see that we've got 40,000 addresses in this location, but I can filter it down using the attributes. So I'm going to say, well, only show me where the status is equal to occupied. So we can see that we've currently got 14 addresses that are occupied. I can change the color, so this is quite important, so I'm going to make it a red color. And then finally I'm going to give a title. And I can click done. That's now added it to my display, and I can change the size as I wish. What I'd like to do now is actually have a list of those occupied addresses. So I'm going to click plus again. We'll put it below our indicator and we'll choose a list this time. Flood addresses again. Again, we're going to filter based on the status. And then we can adjust the list to show the information we're interested in. So firstly, do I want to include the icon from my map? Now this is a little bit big, so I'm going to turn that off. And then I can configure, okay, well, what attributes do I want to show in this list? So if I delete that, and from this drop down, I'm going to choose the full address. So I can now see the full address in this list, and I can change the size of that text to something that's slightly smaller. Again, I'm going to give it a title. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to provide some action. So as I interact with this list, I want to update the map. So if I click an address, can I flash it on the map and perhaps zoom to that location? So within these actions here, I can choose to flash on the map and zoom. So now when we add this in, if I click any of these, it's going to take me down to that particular address. So it's very easy to find and revisit. The final thing I want to do is add a pie chart which shows me the status of the evacuation. So I want to understand, well, how close are we to evacuating everyone? So we're going to choose a pie chart against addresses, and we're going to create this pie chart against the status. So we can now see that we've got about 80% are unchecked and 20% are evacuated. We can then start thinking about how we want to configure this pie chart. So what colors, what labels do we want? So I'm going to turn the labels off for now. And then under the slices, I can change the color scheme. Now, personally, I'd recommend replicating the color scheme you've got in the map. So for occupied, I had a red color. So it's worth making sure that's consistent. For evacuated, perhaps we'll make that green. And for the unchecked, I think it was grey. So now we can very clearly see the green area is the area we really want to be covering the entire pie chart, which is showing that everyone is safe. Give this a title. And it might be that I want to include actions against this as well. So as I interact with the pie chart, do I want to filter the display in any particular way? So I'm actually going to filter the addresses so we only see the addresses that conform to whatever we've got selected here. I'm going to have a slight rejig. Perhaps I'll move this to above the list. So we've now created a dashboard that allows us to see the occupied addresses. We can see the status of all addresses, and we've got a list of places we need to revisit. If I interact with the list, it zooms me to that location. If I interact with the pie chart, we can see just those that are either evacuated or unchecked. So in a few minutes there, we created a really nice, engaging dashboard. Now I've already created one that provides a little bit more capability, so let's look at that before we move on. And you can see that I've got similar elements here. So we've got all the addresses. I've got the number of addresses that are vulnerable. I can see the available rest centres, and this will dynamically adjust. So as a rest centre reaches capacity, that will drop off the list. I can see the occupied addresses, I've got a list of that, and I've got the status dashboard. The other element I've included, if we zoom down here, is I've added an extra map, and within this I've used the current traffic status. So in the event of a flood, this would be ideal because it allows us to understand, well, are there certain roads that are impassable at the moment which we should avoid for the flood response? So dashboards are great. They provide a really nice interactive environment that tells me exactly what's happening on the ground. Now, before we finish, there's one final element I want to discuss, and that's story maps. Now, I'm using an existing example here that one of our customers has created. And story maps are a really great way of sharing information in an engaging and exciting way. So this is an example around coastal flooding, and I can brief myself very easily just by scrolling through this application because it uses text, images, graphs, charts, videos, maps to tell a very engaging story that helps me understand, well, what is coastal flooding and how can we start to address it. This could be used for self-briefing, so as a member of the public I can read up on this, or it could be used for briefing your team if there's key concepts you want to talk them through. But story maps are really about the narrative and about helping people understand the results for your analytics or your plans or proposals. Now there is another new story map that's just come out, and that's called Briefings. And some of you may have noticed that was actually what I was using at the beginning. So Briefings provide a much more slide-based approach. So it's very similar to PowerPoint, where I can have a slide at a time and I can talk through step by step the process I want to discuss. You can embed graphs, charts, images, as I've just shown you in the other story map. We could also include applications, all the mobile apps that I've been showing, or you can have a very slide view. Now the aspiration is that in one of the next releases there's going to be an application that will allow you to take these story maps offline. So particularly in the public safety space, that is an amazing innovation because that's going to make them so much more usable for responding to in environments where we can't necessarily rely on having internet. So hopefully you found this session useful, but just as a quick recap, we started off by looking at instant apps, which are a great place to start because they provide a nice, easy to use and intuitive way of building applications. However, they are also great for experts because the capability is fantastic. Experience Builder gives you a lot more creative control to create something that looks and feels exactly the way you wish. Dashboards provide metrics and statistics, but they're also really good for providing a live view. And finally, story maps are all about the narrative, about helping people understand, well, why have you done this? What's the plan? What are the results of the analytics? So thanks everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this session, and please do feel free to look at some of the other videos because they're all very insightful. Thanks a lot.